Hi everyone. In this video, we'll be discussing about claims databases. Let's say we built our cohort, our code runs perfectly, but the results are wrong. And the reason is something that we often ignore, that is the enrollment gaps and plan switches. So imagine a patient who looks perfectly eligible in our data set, but actually had no insurance coverage for a part of the baseline period. Would we include them in our study? So that is something we need to answer. If we are preparing for clinical data or RWE rules, this is one of the concepts that we can't afford to get wrong. That is continuous enrollment, plan switch, and baseline period. In this video, I will explain baseline period enrollment gaps and plan switches with simple examples, exactly how they are handled in real world datasets, in real time scenarios in the organizations. So let's look at the claims data first. What is claims data for those who are new to RWE and claims data? We'll see what is a claims data. So whenever we go to hospital or pharmacy and use insurance, a record is created for the payment, and that record is called as the claim. Sometimes it's cashless, so it depends upon the insurance policy. For many organizations, it is cashless. If you have a corporate insurance, it's cashless. You go and make an initial payment, a small amount, and then the rest of the amount is collected from the insurance company directly. So no need to go with reimbursement. The insurance company pays for your hospital visits, hospitalization cost, and everything. So in those scenarios, you create a claim, a record. So it contains the patient ID, the date on which the service was provided. For example, the patient got admitted for some indication, and the patient ID is there, identifier of the patient, the service date on which the patient got admitted, what was the diagnosis, let's say it was a stroke, then we'll have a diagnosis code for it. What was the procedure undergone for the patient? There was a surgery, or in that scenario, we'll have a procedure code. What all medications were administered to the patients during that period of admission? Then we'll have the drug codes and all. We'll also have the cost, which has to be collected by the hospital from the insurance company. So this is what claims data is about. Also, it's very important to understand one concept called index date. It's a part of any all RW studies. Index date is a reference date. It's a that marks the start of a follow-up in the study. It can be the first exposure of a drug, or a first diagnosis of a disease, or any event of interest. For example, many studies that we worked, we see it can be initial diagnosis of cancer. Sometimes it's advanced diagnosis of cancer, or it can also become the date the patient started the first prescription of a drug of interest. Let's say pharmaceutical company, they have a drug and they want to see how the patients are doing after taking the drug. So that in that scenario, if the drug start date will become the index date. There may be scenarios where hospitalization event is seen as the start, as the index date, as the start of an event of interest. So this varies from study to study, and usually it's given to us in the SAPR protocol. And based on that, as a programmer, we go about deriving it, the index date. If it is, say, the advanced diagnosis of cancer, then we'll go and take the advanced diagnosis date as the index date. Advanced diagnosis can be stage 3B or stage 4, and it's usually provided to us. There is a concept of baseline, 180 days baseline. So it's a very important concept in claims data. And we ensure the enrollment must be continuous without gaps. What we mean by enrollment is a patient should be enrolled in a insurance policy throughout the time. It's like switching on the CCTV camera. If the patient is not enrolled, we don't have any visibility on the patients, what is happening during the period of gaps. Now, is it always 180 days? Not necessarily. Sometimes it can be 12 months, or we take a number as 360 instead of 365. Many companies they use 360 days. Sometimes it is 6 months. Then we take 180 days, 30 days per month. We are considering. So to make it simple, that's how we are programming. So sometimes it can be 180 days, sometimes it can be 360 days. It depends upon the. It varies from study to study, and usually it's provided to us. So this is not something we have to figure out. It's usually provided to us by the stakeholders. Whoever is giving us this study as a programmer, we don't. This is something given to us. And why do we look at the 180 days baseline? What it means? So basically, it means we are looking back in time. From the index date, we are looking back 180 days. So if you are coming from the background in clinical trials, then you can take it as index date is the exposure date. And prior to the exposure date, we also have the medical history in clinical trials. All the medications the patient may have taken, concomitant medications, and we have also adverse events, what all patient have experienced before the start of the study drug. Similarly, here as well, before the index date, we look at the data, just like medical history MH data set. Here also, we look at the medical history of the patients as well. And then the look back period can be 180 days or 360 days. Why do we need to look at baseline? That we'll see here. So let's say our index date is the first cancer treatment, and baseline is 180 days before the index date. By looking back in time before the index date, we get to see the different comorbidities the patient is experiencing. For example, it can be diabetes diagnosis. The patient may have claimed for diabetes, claims for diabetes, hypertension, kidney disease. So all these conditions can be identified based on the claims data. Let's take second another scenario where we are taking the index data as the enzalutamide. Let's say drug for cancer. Start of this particular drug is the index date. And in that scenario, we will be interested to see, we'll be looking back in time from index date. In this scenario, 180 days. And we'll see if the patient had undergone any chemotherapy, hormone therapy. Because it's a cancer drug, definitely we want to know if this kind of the patient had already been treated for cancer before. Because that can have an impact on the our results. If you are if you are thinking a patient got diagnosed, we are looking for a patient who is having, let's say, castrate-resistant prostate cancer. We want to make sure that the patient doesn't have any other diagnosis of cancer. Otherwise, it can have an interaction with the current treatment we are giving. We don't know the results when we see, is it because of the other cancer or is it the prostate cancer? It also helps to make sure the patient is treatment naive or not. In other words, the patient has been treated before or not. Let's take another example. Scenario where index date is a prescription of a drug A. Now again, we are looking back in time and ensuring that drug A is not used before. Otherwise, we cannot differentiate between a new user and an existing user. In epidemiology, we have something called incidence and prevalence. So if you're interested in incidence, the new cases of a particular disease to test our drug, we want to make sure that it is a new user. In other words, we don't misunderstand or label a patient who is already taking a drug, an existing user, as a new user. So baseline looking at the baseline data helps us to ensure that it's a true initiation of a treatment. Another example is of disease severity. Baseline helps us to estimate severity. May not be precise, but does get an estimate of it, approximation of it. Let's say patient has multiple hospital visits. Then we can get to know whether there is a severe issue or not. Some severity is there in that patient. There has been frequent lab tests, frequent ICU admissions. Then we know that the patient is going through the severe disease condition. Like in clinical trials, we have A dataset, A severity, where you precisely get that information. It's very severe, moderate, etc. But here it's not like that. Here we kind of get an estimate based on the data, claims data, based on the hospital. It's a proxy, we can say, hospital visits, etc. ICU admissions. Why would it matter? Because when you are comparing two cohorts, let's say you're comparing a group that is taking a drug A and the other group taking drug B, and you're checking the drug A versus drug B. In that scenario, we want to make sure that the groups are similar in nature. The cohorts are homogeneous in these aspects where the severity is considered, the other factors that can have an impact on the effect of a drug. So those covariates should be similar across both the cohorts in order to avoid bias in the results. Let's say if one cohort has a healthier patients and the other cohort has all sick and severe patients, then definitely the comparison of drug A versus drug B may not yield a accurate result. Then looking at medication adherence behavior, we look at the prior medication fills, whether the patient is regularly filling the drugs or not. If we look back in time, we get to know whether let's say the drug has to be taken, the patient has to fill the drug every month. 30 pills, 30 pills are filled every month and he has to take it once every day. If he's not taking the refill, like if once in 2 months he's filling, then we know that the patient is skipping the doses. Adherence is affected and it often impacts the outcomes also. So this also helps to stratify patients into cohort A and cohort B, drug A versus drug B, so that we have patients who are taking the drug similarly. Otherwise, if drug A is taken irregularly, the group A is not adherent. The patient takes drug once in 2 or 3 days instead of one every day. On the other hand, the cohort where drug B is given is taken every day, then the results will not be correct because the adherence is different for both the groups or cohorts. So we have to make sure that the stratification of groups also takes into consideration the adherence part, the severity part, adherence part, the comorbidities. All this should be similar. There's also important reason for looking at baseline, that is for exclusion, applying the exclusion criteria. Let's say we want to exclude patients with stroke. In that scenario, we'll look back in time and see if the patient had any stroke claim, a claim for stroke, hospital admission, ICU admission, or any treatment for stroke or not. If yes, we'll exclude the patient. So looking back in time, that also helps us to apply the exclusion criteria on the cohort. Cost utilization and baseline. So if we want to compare how the cost reduces after a particular drug is given, maybe the drug is more cost effective, cost benefit, we feel the drug is more effective in treating a disease at the same price as the existing drug. So definitely we want to go back in time from the index date and see how the cost is before we gave the new drug, or before we didn't give the drug. Actually, it's observational study. So when the patient started a new drug, switch the drug. So before versus after, we can compare only if we know go look back in time in the baseline data and ensure that we have the reports or the results from how much the patient had to incur the cost from his pocket versus after the taking the new drug of interest, what is the cost the patient had to incur from his pocket. So did we see a reduction in the expenses from the patient? If yes, then our drug is more cost effective. This helps us to understand the economic burden of a disease. of taking a drug A, the economic burden was, let's say the amount was 1000, and after taking drug B, the expense reduced to 800. So we can differentiate that. And again, baseline data is important here. So what is a baseline start and baseline end? So index date, let's assume what is, we know index date, it's the initial, it can be, for example, initial diagnosis of a disease. So with the initial diagnosis, let's say is 1st of January 2023, and the baseline period is 180 days. Let's take this as an example here. In that scenario, if one day before the index date is the end of the baseline period, one day before, let's say today is the index date, in that scenario, the baseline period will end yesterday. And when the baseline period will start, you can add 180 days to it. So 5th of July 2022 will become the start of the baseline period, and it will end in 31st of December 2022. And the index date is 1st of January 2023. We'll see some more examples to explain this part. We look at a couple of scenarios and ensure that we understand what is enrollment gap in baseline period. So we know what is the index date. We have taken an example of 180 days as baseline period before the index date. And we are ensuring there is continuous enrollment or no gap in the insurance policy. So let's start, the index date is 1st of January 2023. This is the index date, 1st of January 2023. And after that, we call it the follow-up period. We are following the patient. And prior to that is the baseline period. So the baseline period starts at 5th of July 2022, 180 days before. And the baseline ends at one day before the index date. Index date is 1st of January 2023. So the one day before would be 31st of December 2022. This is the baseline end date. So here is the baseline period. Baseline start date 5th of July 2022 to 31 of December 2022. We have 180 days here. So we check for enrollment coverage between these two periods, baseline start date and the baseline end date, including both the dates. Both the dates are included, and there should be no gap. That is continuous enrollment in this scenario. Let's take one example here. Patient is this same with the same dates, 1st of January 2023 as index date. Here this is a patient whose start date, if you see, is 1st of January 2022. And the end date is 31 December 2023. There is no gap. So we can see that this is a long period, and 5th of July 2022 to 31st of December 2022 baseline period falls in this period of time. There's overlap here and there is no gap. So this patient has continuous enrollment during our baseline period. Again, the baseline period is 5th of July 2022 to 31 December 2022. So there is no gap and it's a continuous enrollment. Next, take the second example. So this patient is continuously enrolled from 5th July 2022 and 30th September 2022. You can say 30th of September 2022 is continuously enrolled in Plan A. Plan ID is 1. Again, the plan ID changes 1st of October 2022 to 31 December 2023. The plan ID changes. In this scenario, will we be considering this patient? Is he eligible? Is he continuously enrolled? Yes, he is continuously enrolled. Even though his plan ID is changing, there is no break in the insurance coverage. You can see 30 September it ends and 1st of October it starts the next insurance. So this plan ID may change when you say, when we say the patient's plans changes. It can be sometimes due to upgrading the plan. Sometimes we upgrade our plans from basic insurance to premium. Or there are scenarios where we change the jobs. And when we resign from our company, the last day is the policy, last day in the company. If it's a corporate insurance, the policy ends. And the next day, if you're joining a new company, the policy restarts. Again, there is a change. So this is continuous enrollment scenario, and there is no break here, even though the plan ID changes. Next example. Here you see the patient start 1st of January 2022 to 30th of September 2022. The patient is on plan A, and the plan B starts at 5th of October 2022. There's a gap of from 1st of to 4th, actually, there is no insurance. That is 1st of October to 4th of October, the patient has no insurance. Let's assume the patient took a break, 4 days break from before joining the new company. Sometimes we do take a couple of days break when we change the company. Let's assume that scenario. So in that scenario, this is a break of 4 days in continuous enrollment, and this patient will not be considered for a study because we miss something here. If something admission happened during that period of time, then we'll not really capture that data. Let's take the next example. The patient start plan A till 30 September 22, and the plan B starts at 3rd October 2022 and ends at 31 December 2023. Now, this change in plan also affects, even though there's a gap of just 1 to 2 days in the month of October, we still will drop this patient from the analysis because, again, there's a break in enrollment period. The policy was not covering the entire baseline period. So this is very important concept in claims database where we look at the enrollment. Now we saw the theoretical part, the conceptual part, which is very important to understand. And next video, we'll see how to implement it. That is very important. Video, we will see its implementation using different programming languages. So if you found this video useful, please subscribe for more real world data and clinical analytics tutorials. For questions on or collaborations, you can reach me at the email shown on the screen, and see you in the next video. Thank you.